Welcome back, everyone, to the Canadian Agriculture Unpacked podcast. Somewhere on your screen, you have our contact information. If you would like to contact us to talk about an issue you've heard us talk about on the show, please contact us. If you'd like to talk about something you would want us to talk about on the show, contact us as well. And of course, if you would like to appear on the show in person, let us know, and we can accommodate that as well. I want to welcome back Jack Wilkinson and Wayne Easter to the show. Most of you know their CV. Suffice it to say that they have served their country and farmers diligently for many, many years. So welcome, gentlemen. Before we want to talk about the WTO in general, about domestic support, especially within the dynamics of what we're seeing with the U.S. now. But before we do that, Wayne, I wonder, I think last time you mentioned that you had something going on in Ukraine. I don't think you've enlisted in their army, so I wonder if you could tell us what you're doing over there.
Just to background this a little bit, and I've had a lot of Ukrainian friends, especially in Alberta. Some of my best friends were Ukrainian, and so a colleague and I went to the Rebuild Ukraine conference in actually November 2022. The Prime Minister spoke at their Prime Minister, and he said basically that, look, our economy is every bit as important as our military rebound. And we need Canadians to be in Ukraine investing now. So we kind of took that to heart. What could we do? One of my colleagues is a potato specialist, actually. And we formed a little company. We call it Razom Invest Canada Incorporated. We connected up with a guy in Manitoba, actually, who has land over there, or 49% interest in land. At the same conference, we went over and we decided that we would grow potatoes, which we did. Not many acres that year, 13 hectares, about 30 acres. But it just to get a feel for what it'd be like there. And our production, because we put the right inputs on, looked after them properly, was about pretty near twice as much per acre and a better quality than they were getting in Ukraine. So we wanted to be on the ground to see what we could do. Ukraine is a big potato producer. Their quality of potatoes leaves a lot to be desired. Their storage leaves a lot to be desired. And their handling needs a lot to be desired. So there's a lot of opportunity there. So where we are at the moment. We grew again last year. We're planning a crop for this year. But we would like, and I've met with different levels of government, we'd like to be able to put a seed farm in place with nuclear seed propagation labs, etc., so that they have potato seeds without virus and without disease, because they don't have a certification system at the moment, and that would and propagation from that would really improve their ability to produce quality potatoes in Ukraine. It's all on our own dime, which is rather expensive at the moment. We hope eventually to get our money back, but we always wonder every time we see something happen, what's going to happen next. So we're there. We're trying to do our thing. We're in an area, we're 5 hours away from the war zone, although when I was there last March was the worst. I was there 12 days, had 17 air raid alerts. But look, nobody pays attention to the air raid alerts anymore in Ukraine. They go on with business like it's normal. If you're in downtown Kiev, you'd think you're in downtown Toronto. Streets are full, sidewalks are full, restaurants are three-quarter full. Life becomes normal, in a war zone to a certain extent. And it's sad what's happening. You hear about some Arab people that worked on the farm got conscripted into the military, and you got to have people to fight the fight. So we're there. We'll see what happens.
To put things in perspective, and I don't know anything about the Ukraine, but even in Canada, if someone attacked in Vancouver or in Toronto, Halifax, farmers in the rural areas could still be farming, right?
Yeah, one of their biggest problem down in the eastern end where the war is really, I think they've re-cleared. Canada is expert, and as Jack would know, in terms of demining, and they've demined I think down there somewhere around 100,000 acres of land of mines, and that's really, in that agriculture area. There's a lot of land down there that's in the eastern area that's not been farmed now, because of the war, and it's just got to end because it's a breadbasket of Europe. I mean, 6 feet of black topsoil where we are. It's something else.
Wow. Any questions for him, Jack?
No, I just think it's great that you're doing it, Wayne. I mean, it's one of those things where you can kind of take the opportunity of all the things in the technology and the science we've had available to producers in Canada and export that. I mean, I was involved in the Crop Development Foundation work until last year on the board. And I mean, it's just incredible what we can do if we can get some help and assistance. Thank God you got a good pension, Wayne.
Well, Jack,
Listen, that's absolutely true.
again, to put things in perspective, Jack, you will recall when we worked in IFAP,
Yep.
other farmers would be phoning home to see if their families were safe, if their families had survived the night. I remember one farm leader from Zimbabwe
Yep.
who phoned home in the morning to make sure his family was safe. Our guys were phoning home to see if their team had won the night before, or if they had an early frost or a late frost. These guys were, it was about survival.
Yep.
It's amazing, like where we are in Ukraine is we're not far from Belarus, in Luhani area is where it is. But that whole area was where the Russians first come in from and got to the edge of Kiev. You see lots of buildings blowing up. I mean, certain areas you'll run into 6 or 7 tanks on the side of the road that are both blowing up and burned out. That's where the Russians were first and got right to that bridge in Kiev that everybody's seen on TV. So you see lots of destruction and you go through military checkpoints all the time, every little town you go through. It is really so unnecessary and sad, and they could be doing so much in terms of feeding the world and greater prosperity for themselves. Yeah. If this thing would just come to an end. I don't know what's wrong with the human race these days, but we're certainly not helping ourselves for the future.
Okay, well, good luck with your ventures there, Wayne. So let's focus now a little bit on the WTO. I mean, with the things that we're now dealing with as far as what's coming out of the U.S., trade is very challenging, but the WTO still continues to be the multilateral organization that is supposed to manage trade around the world. They're supposed to do implementation. There's supposed to be a dispute resolution mechanism, which right now is basically dysfunctional. But when we get to the WTO and we talk about domestic support, that's one of the things that Canadian farmers have been interested in for years, because at the end of the Uruguay round, you will recall, countries had to make commitments, especially the big paying spending countries in agriculture, had to make commitments as to how much they would reduce that domestic support. So then when you get to a country like the U.S., with whom we have an open border, some of the domestic support that is flowing in the U.S. can still have a big impact on Canada, even though they may be within the discipline that was regulated by the WTO. So in comparison, if you look at the value of farm gate production in the U.S., is around $200 billion, $210 billion. In Canada, it's about $99 billion. Actually, I thought the difference in the value of farm gate was bigger than that, but we're almost half of the value of the U.S. farm gate production. Now, at the end of the Uruguay round, Canada and the U.S., the biggest spenders in the world, they had to significantly reduce their their amber spending, and the U.S.'s commitment was around 19 billion. Canada's was about 4 billion, sorry, 14 billion, and currently the U.S. is spending 75% of their commitment. Canada is only spending about 25 to 28% of their commitment. So my question is, what sort of impact do the subsidies in the U.S. have on our ability to be competitive around the world, and our ability even to be competitive with U.S. farmers with the exports that we send to the U.S.? Jack, go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Bob. Just to put a little context here, the reason we wanted the WTO, so many countries wanted to have those negotiations, were because we were unable to get the U.S. to reduce its support for its producers on our own. We didn't have enough. You don't have enough leverage as a smaller country, and so therefore the sense was the only way these negotiations between Europe to reduce and U.S. to reduce was to have all the countries of the world sitting in one room and agreeing on a set of rules and what would be acceptable. I mean, you use colors like amber. For the layperson, they don't know what that means. Green is basically environmental support, something that doesn't affect your production. Amber might be, for example, some of the crop insurance add-ons, some of the general support that all individual farmers in a country might have. And the ones that were really agreed to get rid of was commodity-specific support. So therefore, if I'm a corn producer, no matter what the world price is, I'm going to get a U.S. check for how much per bushel for that production. And so what was going on is some countries, like European countries in the U.S., those farmers really had support levels so high, it didn't matter what the world price was. Even though their surplus was going there, it was really undermining and destroying the world price. They, as individuals, still got that supplemental check in the mail. And so next year you just grew more, and next year you just grew more, and there was no governor as far as world price. Whereas Canadians and a lot of underdeveloped countries, we basically lived on that world price with a little bit of government support. So it was critical that this moved to a world stage to negotiate the reduction in these trade distorting subsidies, the red subsidies, get them down, hopefully eliminate them totally, so that world market made more sense. It encouraged farmers in developing countries like Wayne was just talking about. Not that Ukraine is developing, I would say it's a pretty developed, but it still would encourage the marketplace and the price signals from the marketplace to go directly back to that producer, and they would produce for the market, okay? So hence the World Trade Organization started. Big commitments were made. Big changes occurred both in the U.S. and the European Farm Support Programs. In Canada, we didn't have as much, but there still were some changes. For example, if you were a farmer in the prairies, that money used to get to ship your grain to the export position effectively disappeared, okay? We eliminated all of the rail subsidies, and that made a huge change in the prairies. So hog production in your province of Manitoba, Bob, just exploded. We signed a NAFTA agreement shortly thereafter, and it really meant we had a set of rules to trade with the United States. So it wasn't that we traded with the United States because we were not thoughtful. We traded with the United States because it was the closest market. We had a trade agreement with them, and we had phytosanitary. All these rules were similar, language was similar, and it was close. Most of Canada is close to the U.S. border. So that's where the trade started, and we had that trade deal, so it really made a big difference. And that effectively, Canadian agriculture kind of exploded out of the gates with those clear signals on production, trade, and where to invest. And you got the numbers of how much we've grown over the last 30 years.
Yeah, a couple of things. I gave you the wrong information earlier. The
That
U.S.
14 wasn't right.
commitment was 19 billion. Canada's commitment was just over 4 billion.
Yeah.
And we spend only just over $1 billion, and the U.S., of course, is still at 14. But Wayne, before I go to you, I'm going to ask you about green box spending, because as Jack already said, they came up with this weird traffic light system to identify what was okay to spend, what was supposed to be non-trade distorting, what was a little bit trade distorting but tolerable, and that's where the commitments come in. And then they also had I guess, red programs, and those had to be eliminated. They also had blue box programs, and those since then have all been eliminated as well. But when you look at our open border with the U.S., and you look at Green Box program, you know, the U.S. in their last year of notification notified $189 billion of Green Box spending. That's 90% of the value of their farm grade production. Of course, we only notified about 2.3 billion, which is 2.5% of the value of our farm gate production. But when it comes to green box programs in the U.S., I maintain, and Wayne, I'll get you to respond, I maintain that they can be just as trade distorting with our open border as amber box spending.
Yes, they can. There's no question about that. I think when you see the intention on paper on the Green Box program was absolutely right. That you would, spending in that area, that you're improving on the environment or whatever it might be for, I guess, spending for the greater good and not, and supposedly not trade distorting in terms of pricing. That's the way the Green Box was set up to accommodate that. But there's ways of engineering programs around Green Box that are really, in effect, trade distorting. And if your public agenda or your government agenda is such that you want to take advantage of that and design programs in certain ways, then you can do that. And that's what the Americans have done, and what we haven't done. We're a little bit too pure when it comes to dealing with some other countries. They figure, they look at the program now, how can we take advantage of this, and away they go. That's the simplest way I could explain it, Jack. And Bob, I just come back to what Jack said. Like, what was really happening prior to the WTO arrangements and the Uruguay round and coming up with a plan is, in the United States and especially the United States and European Union, they're basically farming the mailbox, is what I would call it. They just produced, never followed, and the market signals meant nothing. And so the rest of us that didn't have those kind of programs, we're farming at a market price, not getting a check out of the mailbox, and we're suffering as a result in being price takers. And after that round, the whole intent of the thing was the market itself would give the signal on what you should produce. And each country, we're a long way from tide water. That's a different disadvantage for us in terms of many of the crops that we can produce. But each country has advantages and disadvantages, and so that would make the whole agriculture industry, the idea was it to make the whole agriculture industry more efficient, and farmers would actually plan their production or their livestock or dairy or whatever it might be based on real market signals itself, rather than a policy engineered by the political establishment or the bureaucratic establishment.
Well, you just hit on something, Wayne, and I think it was Jack that talked about being far away from tidewater. Our farmers in Western Canada are and in I suppose in Ontario as well, although they have the Great Lakes where they can float out some grain. But certainly our Western Canadian farmers are the furthest from tidewater of any other farmer in the world. So if you look at green box spending, the U.S. dredges the Mississippi River system, and that's all considered to be green box.
Yeah.
It's actually an export subsidy. I mean, we got nailed for having an export subsidy with the crow rate, you will recall. We eliminated that, although we didn't have to. Agriculture Minister Goodell at the time came home and said, well, sorry guys, because of the WTO or the GATT agreement, we have to eliminate export subsidies. Actually, the agreement was a reduction in volume and in how much money you could spend, but that's how governments use international agreements to force domestic policy.
I want to interrupt you on that one for a second, Bob. I mean,
Just let me finish on that. But if you look at the U.S., the farmers there have the option of railing it to the West Coast
Yep. Oh, for sure.
or using the Mississippi River system. Go ahead, Jack.
I just didn't want you to badmouth Minister Goodale, even though he's the commissioner over in London. he was very clear to the farm organizations what he was doing. He said, I need to do a 36% reduction on the dollar value and I think on 3/4 of the volume of trade. And he said, I got two choices to make. One, I can bring that in, knowing full well that as time goes on, I'm going to have increased pressure to reduce it down to zero. Or prices, he said, Jack, I was the CFA president then, he said, Jack, prices are really good right now. I'm getting a lot of pressure in the prairies to get rid of the crow support. I'm going to take the time and bite the bullet right now. I think we should be spending money differently. So he basically said, we'll just eliminate it. Nobody's going to notice it. Grain prices are the highest they've been in 20 years, and we'll move on because I'll get nothing but pressure from cabinet to lower that money. So for me, he made the right decision, but it had a big impact long term on transportation. I would have taken the money and built double track the railroad all the way to the goddamn coast, and we still could do that at some point. But one thing I'd just like to add briefly, I don't think people appreciate just how much that WTO agreement changed agriculture usage worldwide. So once I didn't get that check from the European government to export, all of a sudden, all the environmental programs started. So we had rapeseed going into biofuels. We had cereals going into fuels. We had all sorts of change. The U.S. ethanol industry started right after they didn't get a check to export at below world prices. So all of a sudden, that surplus corn from both those areas stopped flooding the world market. They went into green programs like ethanol and biofuels, really revolutionarized that whole system, and it allowed world prices to recover. So good trade agreements, even if they're not perfect, and they never are, you're doing the best you can at the time, can make a huge difference in ag policy. And, at what's going on right now, I think we always got to remember as Canadian farmers, we were at the bottom of the barrel once in the past because we didn't have a good trade deal. And if this one gets ripped up, we got to suck it up, knowing we'll be down at the bottom of the barrel again, and we'll have to fight our way to the top again like we did last time, because we can do it. We're good producers, we're efficient producers, we know how to do it, and we can get our way through this. But we need trade rules that last. You can't have every election, you can't have somebody just walking into the White House and saying, all right, things are off. Who cares that I wrote this? I think we forget that Trump, the last agreement he negotiated with Canada and Mexico, said this is the best deal that anybody has ever negotiated in the entire world, and I did it, President Trump. Now, listen to what he says about it.
Yeah, we're going to get to that a little bit later. I know you're chomping at the bit. So, Wayne, do you think the WTO will ever come to grips with domestic spending? I mean, we've now been in the Doha round for, I think it was 2001 when it was launched. They were getting antsy in the Uruguay round when it lasted 7 years, but we're now looking at 23 years.
I wish it were otherwise, Bob. But I don't think the WTO will get there. We're in a geopolitical world now that is nationalistic, is populistic. You're looking at what's happening in the United States, and as you said, we'll get into that later. But it's where there was this great drive one time, and I guess I'd put it this way. At the WTO, where farmers from around the world, governments from around the world came together, and how can we develop a policy that's, basically fair, but gives everybody the opportunity to have food security in their own country, and efficient producers in other countries be able to export worldwide at reasonable prices without government subsidies. It was kind of an idea of win-win for everyone. And now, and I'll just make the point later again on Trump, but Trump's way of negotiating, there's not a win-win. There's only a win-lose, and he's on the winning side. That's everything right now. And so we're in a completely different kind of world. I wish it wasn't so, because I think there's an opportunity here for everyone. I think there's greater ways to have efficiencies in the world, but the reality is that's not the world we live in. I want to come back to one other point, the Mississippi River. You know, the Army Corps engineers, they look after that. That's a huge subsidy for Americans moving product out of the Midwest. It's unbelievable. You see some of those barges going down. I chaired Canada US for years, and one time when we used to do things the way we should do, we had a 3-day meeting on a paddle wheeler on that river. I forget where we got on. It was somewhere south of Minneapolis, and we went down the river all the way to New Orleans, and we had a 3-day meeting on that boat. Senators, congressmen, senators from Canada, and MPs. And we covered about 52 topics. Bill Graham was chairing the committee for us that time. And, you know, we did a lot of negotiations, a lot of understanding on various issues. So I've seen that river. And the barges carrying grain in that river, Lord God, what an opportunity. And the river's maintained by the Army Corps of Engineers.
Yeah, so and you make a really good point, and that's what I was referring to earlier when I said those farmers at least have the option of going either way. Our farmers don't have that option.
Yeah.
So back to the WTO. I mean, look, and I agree with you. We're in a place now where, first of all, developing countries. And I was at the launch of the WTO in Singapore, and every trade minister from almost every country got up and lauded the benefits of a world trade agreement and talked about it would put $800 billion more into the world economy, which everybody was kind of scratching their heads wondering, well, what, is someone suddenly going to produce $800 billion more? Or will the $800 billion just be redistributed in a different way? But clearly, developing countries, and let's not forget, the Doha round was the developing round, because developing and least developed countries felt they got the shaft in the Uruguay round. India has taken some leadership now at the WTO on that front. So given that the developing countries aren't enamored anymore with having developed countries push a trade agreement on them, secondly, we've got things like the U.S. administration, who doesn't look like they're that disposed to following rules. The dispute mechanism, resolution mechanism, is dysfunctional. Does the WTO still have a function, especially if you think of the proliferation of plurilateral and bilateral trade agreements in many countries, but certainly Canada has adopted that position as well. Jack, what do you think? Is there still a place for the WTO?
Well, there isn't a WTO that's working, but there should be, and ideally at some point we'll get back to it. Because I think the whole fundamental principle here is you have to have a set of rules on how support can be given, but it's way more than that. You have to have a set of rules on phytosanitary, for example, the health and safety of food. You have to have standards on labeling. You have to have standards on all of these things if product is going to move around. And the only way that you can do that so that you don't disadvantage the smaller nations is a rule book that's clear, transparent, and they know what they have to do to be successful. And if you don't have that, then you go back to the old days, and all three of us have been there before, with the ones who've got the most political might and the biggest checkbook win every discussion. Now, Wayne has described that we're right back there again right now. I hope it doesn't last for too long. But this is a horrible state of affairs. And if you want a world that's going to function properly, you need world leaders who've got a little bit of empathy. Now, that isn't that complicated a word, empathy, but it's not shared by every world leader. And the problem is, if you don't care about anybody else other than the people in your country, how are you going to have a world system that's going to fairly treat people? One other little bit. The problem with the reduction of our first trade agreement was the reduction of tariffs. And I think developing countries got shafted in that discussion. I traveled a lot when I was the international president. So you're chatting in a country that the main revenue stream in that country is import duties and export duties. They don't have income tax. They don't have an upper class or middle class. They have ultra rich that don't pay any taxes in any country. They're no different. So the way they made the money to do everything was import and export duties. Well, the big issue at the first round was the reduction of both of those. So they were willing to say, okay, we'll reduce it if in fact we get jobs, if we get opportunity, if we get development. But they didn't. All that happened was there was a reduction, and somebody sitting in the US or Europe sent the finished product into their country at a lower tariff rate and made all of the money. So they were so pissed off after that deal and how they saw it roll out in their country, they said they would never, ever sit down and negotiate again because they were taken advantage of. And I'll just give you one example. I was at one meeting, it was a woman from Barbados. She said, I am the minister in 7 departments, Jack. I have 5 staff. I don't have a prayer going into the European and US meeting rooms in defending anything in my country. It is impossible. I don't have the resources. I can't go through hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of tariff lines. We will lose in these negotiations because they're not fair negotiations. And we all pretended it was the best we could do, and it was, but man, there was a lot of disparity. And you see right now, some of these countries worldwide have not seen any lift with the trade agreements. And so why would you sit down in a room for the next round?
Well, of course, Jack, and that reminds me of a Cairns meeting we were at. I'm not sure if you were at it. I think it might have been in Australia, where Canada was pushing back on the farmer declaration.
Yeah.
And they called a special meeting early in the morning for countries to mull over the night before what Canada was proposing and to meet again in the morning to see if we could come to some resolution. And overnight, the Australian farm organization that had subsidized some of the developing country farm leaders to come to the meeting had told them, if you guys want your return ticket paid for, you better agree with us and don't agree with the Canadians. But you're absolutely right. I mean, these countries had no chance whatsoever. When it comes to tariffs, yeah, I mean, if countries didn't have tariffs, they weren't supposed to reintroduce tariffs after the agreement. Same with domestic spending. If you were at zero in domestic spending, you weren't allowed to introduce new spending. And so again, it was the developed countries, or especially the large spenders, that were forcing the agreement on the other countries. And then, of course, my last comment on that subject is when we were in the Philippines at an IFAB meeting, and we did a farm tour, and we saw the Cargill grain terminal. And all we could think about was the $800 billion added to the economy, and wondering, well, maybe it is a redistribution of who's going to get the wealth from that agreement. So, Wayne, any last comments on that?
Well, just the thing on the and this is what we're seeing with Trump now. I mean, as Jack said, best trade agreement ever signed. Here he is breaking every part of it, breaking every part of tariff agreements that were there. WTO the same. When you have the strongest military power in the world doing these kind of things, the rest of the countries are going to have to smarten up and stand up, or this thing is going to really spiral down out of control. But then WTO itself, the dispute resolution is really critical. But the problem with it, even when it was at its best, that when there was a breaking of the rules, by the time that dispute resolution got through its all its hearings, etc., it was 2-3 years later or longer, and the damage was already done. But you cannot have a trade agreement without dispute resolution that works. I underline that critically. You have to have rules. I mean, if you had speeders on the road and you don't have enforcement, well, then you get no rules. then the rules really don't exist. So it's the same with a trade agreement. You have good trade agreements that countries are politically willing to abide by, tough negotiations yet, yes, but you also have a resolution to handle disputes, and quickly.
Bob,
Jack,
I
do you
just
have a
don't want
comment?
to, well, no, I just don't want to leave it with the impression that I'm against a rules-based system. I think it's critical.
Yep.
And it's critical for countries like Canada because we have so much export. You really have to know what the rules of the game are. And then, and Canadians follow those rules, then you expect that you're going to get into that country you're exporting. You expect that that ship is going to agree with the phytosanitary rules that went the paperwork with the ship. It's going to get landed, it's going to get unloaded, and you're going to get paid. And if we don't have systems like that, the economy worldwide will suffer greatly. So I'm in favor of a rules-based system, but we're not seeing that right now. So I hope we do everything within our power to move back. And the only reason that was agreed upon was because the vast majority of countries around the world stuck together and pushed ahead. They didn't let the big superpowers have the order of the day. They didn't get everything we wanted, but we made progress. Here's another chance where the countries of the world are going to have to stick together. I mean, what's going on right now is somebody saying, I want all the production to be in the United States. I want the world to be my market. And if anybody comes into my country, I'm going to charge them tariffs. Well, I think if you look at the trade balance, if all of us put countervailing tariffs on the United States, this conversation would soon be sorted out because the U.S. would be suffering so strongly if you looked at how much if we all put countervailing duties on. So I think we have to once again stick together and work towards a rules-based system, and that is possible.
Well, exactly.
I like that,
agree.
Jack. Right on.
Yeah, a rules-based system. And of course, when countries agree to an agreement,
Yep.
it's by consensus. I mean, the WTO doesn't have an enforcement mechanism. They can only go by the rules that have been made, and then a country has to then elect whether they want to obey the rules or whether they don't, and that's part of the problem. Two last questions before we go into our current situation with the U.S. One is perhaps some advice for farm organizations currently. Are we better off fighting other countries to reduce their domestic support? Should we be trying to force our own government to increase our domestic support, or should their energy be spent on private sector solutions?
Actually, I think you got to do all of the above. I don't think it's a one or the other. I think, yes, we have to negotiate, and I really like Jack's idea. I really think, there's one thing about what's happening in the States. Maybe it's interesting how Canadians have come together and became patriotic in the matter of a week in what they're thinking and what they're doing. Maybe it'll force the world to come together. And how are we going to make this world a better place and be a place that's based on trade rules and other things? But at the same time, in terms of what you got to do in negotiations with other country and getting rid of unnecessary subsidies and so on, you got to support your own farming community in ways that's at least amber, or that farming community under some of these scenarios won't be there by the time the negotiations are done. So you got to stick with them, and there's always a place for the private sector. There's never enough investment for the private sector in research and development, I don't think, and some of the best research is done at the farm level. And Agriculture Canada needs to buck up too, in terms of its R&D, because that's where a lot of our very good products originally came from, very good varieties that, are making us much more productive and much more efficient in this country. So you got to do it up a little bit of all three.
Jack?
Well, I agree with Wayne. I think one thing we've got to remember is our agriculture is very large in Canada in comparison to the size of our population. So it's very unlikely that we'll ever get the same kind of government support per unit of agriculture production that the European Union, with its 500 and some million people, the US with its close to 400 million people, are ever going to get. So I am a fan of, we have to make the farm profitable. We need a set of rules to do it. We need the research and development to make us the most efficient producer we can possibly be in the world. Right now, we've got a low dollar that helps us from an export point of view. And we have programs so that we can support the farm family to get through bad times. And these bad times are not going to be weather. They're probably going to be introduced by tariffs and trade disruptions. We've got to have our guys get from this side to that side so that we can be a big player in the Canadian economy and a big supplier of food and nutrition around the world. So that's where I think the government support will most likely come in to really help to carry us through. We're going to have some income problems probably here over the next 1 or 2 years, maybe a bit more. And I would like to see every tariff dollar that's collected go to those industries that get damage done to them because of the tariff war. So we're still around to carry on in the future.
Thanks for that, guys. Okay, I'm being told that it's time to wrap up, but before we do, I would
not
like to
surprising.
spend a little bit of time on the current situation with the U.S. And we already have touched on it several times, so it might not be that long.
Yeah.
But we talked about the open border. We all know that the agricultural industries are integrated between Canada and the U.S. What can we do?
Well, for me, you don't panic. What's going on is what I would do, what we all were involved in. That is, you know what your business case is for why trade should take place. We're meeting with all sorts of people in the United States to try and talk to them about this. We're talking to all the business people of big companies as well as those commodity and farm organizations about how we're interconnected. 80% of the potash that the U.S. uses comes from Canada. The list goes on and on and on. They do need us very deeply. Their agriculture needs us, and so does their consumer. So we just take the high road, we fight the good battle, we lobby like hell, and then we lobby our domestic government for the types of programs to get us through. Stick together, work as a unit, we'll make it to the other side.
Wayne.
I think Jack summed it up very well, and I would congratulate. Never before, has all the premiers been in Washington D.C. at the same time. There's lots of differences across the regions, but they're all there, and they're relatively on the same wavelength. Getting the information out there, to the Americans. Once a lie is said enough times, it becomes the truth. So you got to counter those lies. Like Trump's $200 billion deficit with us is just not true at all. In fact, who's subsidizing who? They have a trade surplus with us, and services and goods mainly. Where the trade deficit comes from is the shipment of oil to the United States. And not many people know this, but because we're a captive market to the U.S. on crude oil, and their refineries are geared up to take mainly Canadian crude, our oil is sold at what we call an Alberta discount. So oil going to the U.S. from the Brent price is discounted at a minimum $15 a barrel. So who's subsidizing who? We're subsidizing the United States in terms of energy. You got to get those facts out there. And I think it'll take a little while. The consumer price is really up this month in the United States. Yep. Inflation's up in the United States. As people begin to find out some of these things that Trump is doing is going to hurt them, then there will be more political pressure come on that way. And I agree 100% with Jack. Don't get excited. There's going to take some time. It'll take some time for some of these bad ideas to sink into the American public, and the political pressure will start to come on there. But the government has to always be there to get the information in the United States out as best they can, even at the mayor's level, at the northern states level, and our government has to be here to support those industries that are being hurt in the meantime.
And don't back down. Never back down.
Never back down. And something, the uprising in Canada, I think, or the pushback in Canada, has come from places I don't think anybody even expected. And not only that, but you just made the point, Wayne, a lot of supporters of the current administration in the U.S., I think, are really going to start pushing back as well. So thanks, gentlemen. To the viewer, remember, we're going to have upcoming guests, Satish Singh, a former Turkey Farmers of Canada trade guru. We're going to have Dennis Laycraft, Executive Vice President of Canadian Cattlemen, and we're going to have NDP Member of Parliament Charlie Angus, who's done a fair bit of media work in the U.S. on the last issue we talked about. He will be on our show as well. So thanks again, gentlemen.
Take care.
Take care. All the best.